Okay, I think we'll just get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third session of the Grow Asia Learning Alliance webinar series. My name is Nadia, and I'm the Innovation Manager here at Grow Asia. So I see that there are some new joiners on the webinar today, so we'll start with a brief background. The Grow Asia Learning Alliance program, also known as GALA, is funded by the International Development Research Center, also known as the IDRC. The program focuses on promoting action-oriented research through enabling partnerships between researchers and agribusinesses in ASEAN. Through the program, we have engaged over 40 key research institutions and universities in Southeast Asia, spread across Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Myanmar, in learning opportunities such as this one, as well as networking opportunities with stakeholders within Grow Asia's broader network. So this webinar series aims to help agriculture researchers become more market-oriented in their approach to developing research products. And just to quickly recap and also share to our new joiners, in the first session of the series, we discussed the concept of value, what it means to capture value as an agriculture researcher, and how to articulate that into a value proposition. In the second session, we discussed the different business models that are available to agriculture researchers and explored a tool known as the business model canvas. We had two industry speakers unpack their respective businesses using this canvas, and we explored how to apply this tool to developing research products. So this last session is really aimed to tie it all together by providing insights from industry speakers in terms of taking an idea to market and learn practical tips from their respective experiences. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So here is an overview of the session today. So after this, I'll quickly go over a few housekeeping points before inviting our two guest speakers to share a little bit about their product or service that they would like to highlight for the purposes of this discussion. So we have Choo from Mars and Ruel Amparo from Cropital. So after the individual presentations, we'll jump into an interactive panel, which will be led by Anton Palo, General Manager at Foodlink Advocacy Cooperative, who co-led the previous two sessions with us. So after the panel, we'll jump into a short question and answer, which we welcome your questions before closing and next steps. So next slide, please. So just a few housekeeping points. If you do have any clarification questions, please type it into the question box at any time. And we will address it during the Q&A session at the end. And one thing I would like to point out as well is that it would be great if you can edit your name on this platform to also include your organization so that we know who you are. And if there are others online today who would like to reach out to you, they could do so. Next point is that if you have any technical issues during the session, try logging off and on again, or reach out to my colleague Pranav at pranav@growasia.org. And lastly, we will be recording this webinar and we'll send you a recording following the session. So before I introduce our first guest speaker, we wanted to run a few polls with you to get a sense of who is online and whether you have attended any of our previous sessions. So Pranav, please. So I'll give about 15 to 20 seconds for everyone to fill in their responses. Wow, it's great to see that we have quite a variety of audience members online with us today. Once again, I'd like to invite you to indicate which organizations that you represent so others can reach out to you. They should be interested in making a connection. And I also see that there are quite a few of returning audience members. Thank you for your support. And for those of you who have not joined us before, welcome. And if you should find any of the materials that we discussed today slightly out of context, it could be because it is continuation of our previous discussions. So after this session, I will send the recordings of all the previous webinars for your reference. So now I'd like to, with great pleasure, I would like to introduce our first guest speaker. So Fei Choo is the Asia Cocoa Director for Sustainable Sourcing for Mars. She has 25 years of supply chain and strategic sourcing experience in the food industry, and in the past 9 years have been directly responsible for sustainable cocoa development in Asia, where Mars has an extensive program covering plant science research, technology transfer, and community development with tens of thousands of farmers in Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. So over to you, Fei.
Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here today and to be speaking with you. Very happy to be sharing, and just a bit of introduction before we get into the topic today. I just wanted to introduce the Mars purpose. And we are a privately owned organization, so still very much a family business. And the way we define that the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today. And so a lot of the work that we do with farmers and smallholders in Asia and in West Africa and Latin America really reflects this purpose that we uphold. So if you can move to the next slide. The challenge we have in Indonesia, particularly in Asia, is that we've got, in the language of design thinking, the pain points, right? As a big chocolate manufacturer, we are facing a decline of cocoa production in Asia, which used to be the third largest producer in the world. At the same time, due to the demand that's increasing from Asia, we see that the grind and the grind is a proxy for consumption is definitely increasing. So we have this regional imbalance that if we lose more cocoa production out of Indonesia, then clearly we will not be able to grow our business in Asia. Next. The great news is also that we actually know the solution. Due to numbers of research that has been done in Indonesia, we've got 2 research centers in Indonesia, and we have bred for, we do breeding, pest and disease, and as well as soil management and diversification, cocoa diversification models. We do know that actually there is a solution out there, and if the farmers get hold of what we call the triple productivity package of the right planting and genetic material, training and coaching on good agricultural practices, and the right fertilizer and inputs, that definitely they can triple their production as well as and then improve their household income. The grand challenge though was, how do we reach 60,000 Indonesian cocoa farmers to adopt this triple productivity package, and indirectly then also influence 200,000 farmers or farming communities to also follow suit. So that was the pain point. Thank you. So we started off by thinking about what were the community assets that we have. And we looked at the farming community, and we discovered that there were a lot of assets available. Generally, Indonesian farmers are very entrepreneurial. They have a very strong sense of community. There is a lot of social capital that exists in these communities. So we thought, well, let's tap into these assets that are available, right? So we started a search for more entrepreneurial sort of farmers within that community. And we did a number of training and in our Cocoa Academy that gave them agronomy as well as business training, and then helped them start up a business of nursery, and then later, so they produced the quality seedlings, and then later also the input. Now, because there's a business case in doing it, there is also what we were finding in getting adoption among farmers was, if you put farmers into a training without the coaching, it is highly improbable that they will adopt on that basis. So we knew that there had to be the after-sales service. So because these cocoa doctors was in the business of this input, naturally, they were also leaders in the communities, and they obviously had the spirit of wanting to help their community progress materially. They also provided, so this is actually a picture of our Cocoa Doctor Network's in North Kolaka, Southeast Sulawesi. And what they do really a lot is the mentoring or the after, that actually train farmers on better practices that ultimately, gets them more future customers and this constant stream of revenue, but also that they realize that they're also, changing the farms and the lives of people around them. If you can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to focus a little bit on what were our learnings in the next coming slides. And as everyone, I think part of this training is quite aware of the Rogers adoption curve, right? And the diffusion of adoption and technology that takes time. And the idea here is you target innovators and early adopters, and over time you get the next level of the curve coming in. So I wanted to tie in this technology, this curve with some of our learnings from the Cocoa Doctor network. If you can go to the next slide, right? These are some numbers of when we started the program in about 2013 or 14, we did a midpoint assessment in about 2017. And this was some of the results that we saw. The blue line is the use of high quality, superior planting materials, the clones that that Mars has selected over the years. And the green is sort of a bit of the good agricultural practices adoption that we wanted to see. And so if you click next, and again, what we found that there was in areas where there were Cocoa Doctor networks, okay, we found 3 times the national average of higher adoption of superior clones. Over time, because we've done this for a number of years now, the Cocoa Doctors have therefore even trained other people, and the capacity of planting material, for example, that exists today in these 4 areas that we talked about is in the tune of 13 million annual capacity. Now that is quite a bit of planting material, and which talks to the popularity and the demand of the new clones. And it's actually a very good income and profit that also being generated, and imagine the multiplier effect in a rural economy like in Sulawesi. So the results were promising. And if you can go to the next slide, I would just like to talk about then and click next 2 times. The first thing to think about at the start when we are introducing a new technology, a new product, a new service, is that we really need to be keen to go after and target well the areas and the early adopters. We also have to ensure that the work that we do in the early phases is of extremely high quality implementation, because only success can beget more success. So we did it through what we call setting up in the Cocoa Doctor a wow farm. It must be like jaw-dropping, wow, I can triple my yield if I change my clones and do X, Y, Z differently. It was also important to build the service delivery, and that takes time. So you need a certain amount of economies of scale and a number of nurseries. We started out having ambitions of about 3-4 million capacity of planting material. We were pleasantly surprised to find out today that it's at 13, because obviously, more and more people are coming into the system. But also we worked at the same time with NGOs called Swiss Contact to do a lot of GAP training, good agricultural practices training, because you need to prepare the customer base as well, which are the farmers who will eventually be the target customer of these Cocoa Doctors for the higher, better quality inputs and services. So that was pretty much what was happening in the first 3 to 4 years. It was done at a massive scale with 22 over 1,000 farmers, for example, the training. So, but at the Cocoa Doctors, we went after about 120 of them, and these were the ones that we really focused on to put the infrastructure and the capacity together. What we saw in the previous slide was we didn't achieve the 75 to 90%, not without what we call the second point of diffusion, which is the spontaneous adoption that happens when the middle of the curve starts to come in. the early majority and the late majority. Now, the conditions for that to happen are different versus the first group of people. The first group of people are usually risk takers, give them the training and off they go, and they are very enthusiastic. The second, sort of the middle of the bell curve, they take a lot more convincing. So they have to see the visible success that came from the first tranche. They also are less risk takers. So the affordable inputs need to be very much available at the last mile. So this capacity that we've built in the initial tranche had to be available, because if they're trained and then there's a coaching, you wouldn't be able to, I mean, the point is that you need to be able that it is available and fairly affordable for them as well. Now, to get to where we got to, I would say, which is quite promising in the previous slide in terms of the impact and results so far, I wanted to point out that time is a key factor in any innovation and adoption curve. It took us, 5 to 7 years to get to where we got to. And so, at this point, we can say there's still much more services and products we have to put forward into this system to ensure that farmers really get to the next level of sustainability. So the next slide. So I understand that a lot of us here are researchers, and I work a lot with them, from entomologists to plant breeders and all that. I think as we try to think about designing products, and you need to think seriously about how the service delivery model as well to get the products to market. And just some of our learnings that we got from what we've done in Indonesia and Sulawesi is to go where the real potential are. So we started out with surveying and targeting the right areas. And for us, the right areas were communities which had very strong trust and social capital. There was good government support. And then within that, there was a massive amount of training and started to target the early adopters. So we were going specifically after the ones with farmers with the business and service mindset. And when I say service, it was just, like I said, tapping into this inherent human need to want to do something for the benefit of the community. Because a cocoa doctor is in fact a social entrepreneur. And then as we design the products and the services and how, you have to think about several factors, right? I've seen some of our other suppliers who actually wanted to sell the planting material themselves. So for us in Mars, we thought, well, we're not in the business of wanting to make money from our science. So it's not our core business. So we, let it go and let others and let the village and let the business entrepreneurs make money from it. And only when you can find that everyone in the supply chain actually profits from it, but in that profit also assisting others to also grow, then I believe that's quite a sustainable business model to go for. We talked about tapping in the community assets. We long-term wanted it to be very inclusive and participatory, and I'll talk a little bit where we are pivoting to today. And of course, you have to design scalability right upfront at the start, right? The idea is you think long-term, you want to ensure that over time, these businesses are successful and they beget more success and more successful farmers. So that would be, and using social businesses to drive it. We also had to think about what were the right metrics. And when it's not purely a financial metric, although you do need profit, and we are not an NGO, we are profit driven. And I think also the other thing is that we can't do this alone. Trying to solve social, environmental, and social behavioral issues with large groups of farmers you can't do it alone. So clearly we have to work in partnerships that we had to work with government, NGO donors, and even other industries. So think about who are the other partners that we need to bring into this to enable us to reach better scale and better reach, right? And finally, I've got one more slide. And we have started to think about this because we're now coming to a point where initial days, we targeted a lot of the early adopters and the early innovators. The reality is actually we saw now more and more of the other farmers they see success, they come in. I think we are all quite aware that in this slide, that not, equality of opportunity is important. But I think over time, we need to also think about equity. And when I say equity, it is like how there could be even other subsets of the community that may need even more support into the future for them to also, get onto the curve of adoption and in that process, create a better livelihoods for themselves, their family, and their communities. And so this is something that we are thinking about going forward, and how can we ensure that in the adoption of technology, no one gets left behind, and that we are actually creating more and more opportunities for everyone, but also removing systemic barriers and blockers, so that then it becomes a fair playing field. So I see some people on the phone who's partners with us, people like Manfred, who works on Cocoa Trace, and we've been doing a lot of work on, for example, transparency in the system, where the hope is that with better transparency and traceability, that farmers will be able to gain more and more, and the knowledge becomes, and that knowledge access becomes something that's available to all. So with that, I wanted to just thank everyone and hope that you took away some of this, and that this is just one service delivery model. There are many out there, different models out there that we, and that collectively, I think we can work together to make the world we want tomorrow a better one that starts with how we do business today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Faye. I think there's a lot of learnings that we can extract from your experience with Mars, which I would think is quite relevant to a lot of the audience members with us today. And to the audience, we will have an opportunity to learn more about the work that Faye is doing during the interactive panel and Q&A. But if you do have any questions right now, please feel free to start asking them in the question box. And before I move on to the next speaker, we wanted to do another poll with you. So Pranav, if you can help me launch the poll. And we'll give another 5 to 10 seconds. Great, great to see some variety in terms of stages of product development that you're in. And I hope that we could address some of the points during the panel that are applicable and relevant to all of you. And for those of you who are not developing a product or service at the moment, I hope that you will find the discussion to be useful in helping to guide some of your thinking going forward as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, who is going to offer a very different approach to product development and taking it to market, as he is representing a startup, which is faced with a very different set of challenges and opportunities than a multinational company such as Mars. So Ruel Amparo is the CEO and co-founder of Cropital. He is an industrial engineering graduate and was recognized on a national level for student leadership, data analytics, and community development. At 22, he founded Cropital, the largest peer-to-peer lending platform for smallholder farmers in the Philippines. We'll hear more about Ruel's story in his presentation. So Ruel, over to you now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Ruel from Cropital, and we are a crowd lending platform for small farmers in the Philippines. And just to give you a context of what we do, as you are mostly in agriculture, you would know that the smallholder farmers are quite dependent on credit for their inputs such as seeds and fertilizers for them to start farming. Unfortunately, for most of them, despite dependency on credit, the sources of credit are not really that affordable. So in my experience, most of the farmers I've met find it difficult to get loans from banks. But the second alternative for most of them are the informal lenders, basically, that can charge them as high as 20% interest rate per month. So what we are doing in Cropital is basically providing an alternative source of financing for the smallholder farmers. And aside from loans, we are also helping the smallholder farmers connect with different stakeholders or partners that can help them increase their income, such as insurances, technology, and market. And to date, we have more than 1,000 small farmers and around 3,000 active lenders in our system. Okay, so for this discussion, I will be sharing stories, basically, product journeys. So I will be sharing two stories, particularly our main product, which is the crowd lending platform, and another product that we've developed and reached our first customer, which is also an interesting story to share. So next slide, please. Okay, so for this one, okay, so the crowd lending platform. So as you can see here in this slide, there's a photo of me and my grandmother, and this was taken during graduation. And the photo below is actually the small farm that my grandmother owns. It's a rice farm in our province in Bulacan. So as you can see here, as an individual or as a person who generated an idea related to agriculture, my context was actually more on my personal background or my family, since I grew up in a family that does farming. Next, please. So in 2014, that was the time that I graduated from university. And that was also the time that I got work and had savings. So again, this is just a story that I want to share. So knowing and understanding the process of farming, I knew right there and then that we have been getting loans in order to buy the seeds and fertilizers and paying for the labor for the farm from an informal source, which is the barangay captain or the village captain in that sense. And I also know the interest rate, and it's quite high. So what I did, since I had some savings, is start lending small amounts to my family or small farmer relatives also. And the interest is definitely way, way lower. It's a way for me just to try and test it out in one way or another. Then come 2015, after a few cycles of doing it, I've seen interest coming from other people as well, from people within my network, like my siblings and other people, basically. And what I realized here is that apparently what I'm doing, lending to small farmers, is something that people actually would want to do. And as in my understanding as well, it's really both a mix of helping, but at the same time, getting some modest returns in a way or another. So this has been one of the reasons or one of the main trigger that enabled me to ask myself, why not build a product around it? Next, please. So in around this time as well, Cropital was built. So we are a crowd lending platform. It's a website. It can be accessed by going to cropital.com. And basically, we are able to connect the lenders to smallholder farmers. And these are just some of the screenshots of the website. Next, please. So after a while of actually running the organization, we were quite happy with the reception of the lenders or of the users. So we started with quite a small amount, around 500,000 pesos. And from there, we were able to continue develop the product and grow it, and right now reach around 70 million peso and be present in 7 provinces across the country. So this ends the part of the crowd lending platform, but I will proceed with the insurance processing platform. Next, please. So the next product I'd like to share is the insurance platform. So from idea to first customer. Next. So the photos here are basically some of the images that were depicted in our experience in lending already to farmers. So the first are basically the vulnerabilities and the damages of the crops due to extreme weather conditions. And the next photo is the tool that we actually developed in order to help us in this problem or pain point. Next, please. So in 2016 to 2018, this was the time that we were actually just exploring and learning how we would do the business since it's scaling. So one thing that you need to understand also is that the idea stage to the first product or first customer is different from the journey is different from scaling to one customer to 1,000 customer. So during this period, we experienced losses due to extreme weather conditions. So our farmers have been vulnerable to these conditions. And we did our research and actually learned how can we actually reduce the losses during these cases. And we figure out that the Philippine Crop Insurance Corporation, or PCIC, is actually offering free crop insurance for small farmers. So it's like perfect. We could use it. And we also kind of feel like, okay, so why aren't people using it anyway? But when we started doing it, then there we realized kind of why not many people are getting it. So during this period, we have had several challenges in processing, or during our experience, we saw some difficulties, and we kind of ask ourselves as well, if we are actually finding it difficult to process insurance for the farmers that we handle, how much more are actually the farmers who are processing it themselves? So it's a question that kind of stuck to our head. The next. Okay, so in 2019, that's a time wherein we decided to develop already an internal processing system in order for us to be able to process insurance more seamlessly, and in order to reduce cost and to make sure also that we are able to grow more efficiently as an organization. And one thing we realized also during this time is that apparently not only Cropital experienced a problem in processing, but also other similar organizations that provide loans to farmers find it quite challenging. So with this knowledge and also with a first customer that approached us to why not build something like that for me as well, we built a product around it. Next. So in 2019 as well, around March, that was the time where we deployed our product to our first partner client. So we deployed it, and after some time, we do check-ins with them, and we were quite happy actually with the result. So a year after, so early 2020, we revisited also the product, how are they using it, and we're happy with the result. So there have been 100% shift from manual process to the use of the system, and there have been consistent month-on-month use of the product or the tool that we developed. There have been also clear evidence of reduction in cost and increase in efficiency on our partner. And also in terms of losing papers or having damage in terms of the paper forms that are being used in the insurance, we were able to reduce that to 0. And another thing is, since they are a first customer, we were able to generate our first income coming from this product. Next, please. Which basically amounted to around $4,000 US. So this is the end of the presentation that I have. So we could get in touch more with questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruel, for your presentation. So now that we've heard two very different approaches to product development, we're going to get into a panel discussion to unpack both phase and Ruel's journeys to extract some of the learnings from each phase of the process. So at this point, I'm going to invite our moderator for the panel, Anton Palo, who I mentioned earlier co-facilitated the last 2 sessions with us. So over to you now, Anton.
Thank you, Nadia. Before I go through my questions, I would like to ask questions to the audience themselves. Essentially, Pranav, if I may, could you please flash the poll? So the question would be, which part of the value chain is your solution, product or service, whether it's actually ongoing or not, addressing? All right, let's give it 5 more seconds, perhaps. All right, so it's very well spread all, through the 5 areas of agri-inputs, production, processing, sales, and marketing, and others. That's very good. It's very well represented throughout the value chain. All right. So I would like to move on to the main questions for the panel. Perhaps I could ask the panelists to eventually show their faces, their beautiful faces. All right. So essentially, for the first question, businesses often have very different takes on how to do product development, and there's a whole lot of efforts provided there. But then after you've developed your product, eventually you realize, oh, I also need to deal with my customers and figure out what their demands are. So in that sense, how do you manage the interplay between product development and your customer demands to create something that is ultimately of value to your customers? Perhaps we could start with Faye.
Sure. Okay. Hi. So that we didn't stop with the Cocoa Doctors. We are in constant mode of innovation and understanding what the farmers' needs are, and with that, developing other concepts. So traceability and transparency tools, diversification models, crop insurance. There has been multiple. I would say the way to do is to understand what the needs from the farmers are, and to be able to take some risks and pilot. And I would say that what I always tell the teams is fail fast, right? Test and learn and fail fast. Come back and tweak it again. So there's never going to be a perfect, if you waited until you got it perfect, and this is something what I also tell my researchers. Sometimes they say, I need to wait until I fully get all the data that shows that this is the best way to do, you know, pollination of cocoa. And I'm like, I can't wait. Cocoa, if we're losing cocoa farmers, we're losing the crops. It has to sometimes take a low risk approach. Test, learn, fail fast, keep going again. Listen to the voice of the customer. In this case, it's the farmer. So I think only with that approach can we meaningfully make changes that will meet their needs. That ultimately, if they say, hey, I think I can make a good livelihood out of this, while taking care of the social and environmental, protection, then this makes sense for me. So that would be my sort of contribution. Ruel?
Sure.
Right.
So
essentially, there's very much you need to understand your customers very much, and then if in this case, let's say they're very low risk, you do and take that risk and then conduct that trial and error and refinement with regards to your product development, and then eventually secure that value from your customers. How about from you, from your experience, Ruel?
Sure. So on my end, actually, I would like to resonate several points from what Faye mentioned. What is very critical is understanding the need. Okay, so as you can see in the presentation that I shared, what's quite interesting on my end is that the need was actually my need or my personal need. So it was a certain level of perspective. So by understanding the need, there are many ways that you could do. One way is you have that particular need, but the other way is having someone within your team who is developing that solution or product, who is actually the one needing that particular or wanting that particular pain point to be solved. So aside from understanding the need, you need to be able to articulate it as well, in the sense that, is this one particular pain point or a couple of several pain points that are combined all together? Because you might end up creating several solutions because there are many problems that you want to solve. So you need to articulate first. I think 50% of the problem is caused by this problem, and the rest is caused by the combination of everything else. So you need to understand that. Then the next one is having assumptions that are based on valid evidence. Okay, so by valid evidence, this has to be backed up by numbers or backed up by behaviors, because as you can see, doing research you could just do interviews with the customers or with different users. But sometimes one thing that I learned from Grow Asia training with the human-centered design, which I joined, was that people tend to have biases that since you look nice, you seem nice, they will tell you nice things. And it could ruin your data gathering stage. Then another part is, like Ms. Faye mentioned, creating the product the fastest way possible and knowing whether it will break or not. And test it immediately and iterate, then learn immediately so that you could be more prepared before you won't have less, you will have less losses before you scale it.
All right, that's wonderful.
Maybe can I just add?
Sure.
We actually involve the farmer and the community, not just the farming community, but even sometimes we brought in health experts and different sort of members of the community in a participatory workshop when we played back the data gathering phase back to them. So we said, you know, you told us this was a problem. Now, what do you think is the solution? And we actually workshop the solution together with the farming community. That really also is another way to gain trust. They start to realize that actually, hey, they are interested in me as a person, not just my produce and my cocoa, and they actually care. So I think building that trust through the participatory way is really key as well.
All right. So again, very much validating our sessions from before. That's wonderful. We're essentially focusing very much on the customer demand, understanding your customers, and then in this case, doing an iterative process of trial and refining again your product development. But to a certain extent, there's that from Ruel, you mentioned that you're taking your personal experience and then corroborating that with the experiences of others, and then trying to understand what the system might actually need. And then from Faye, I like that idea of building that relationship, that participatory aspect of being with your farmers, which actually leads me to the next question. Pranav, next, please. Now, there's that relationship that you have to maintain with your key partners and with your key partners being key suppliers and other partners, and as well as your customers. Now, on certain occasions, some people might actually think that if you please your customers too much, you probably will have to, take away some from your suppliers. But if you please your suppliers too much, it becomes too expensive for your customers. So there's that zero-sum game kind of play here. Is that the case? So my question will be, how do you manage relationships with your customers, and how does this affect your relationships with your key partners? So may I ask Ruel this time to start?
Sure. So in our case, since we are basically a company that is with less resources, some of the tools that we have on hand in managing relationships with our first customers is actually establishing that trust and being nice. Because one thing that we need at this point, at this very early stage, are people who will be openly allowing us some room for mistakes and ensuring, but given that we can make mistakes, we need to provide assurance that we are committed in improving from those things that might happen along the way. And it's really managing that relationship step by step and eventually translating it as well on the side of the partners. Because the customers are the ones paying, yes, but the partners are the ones that are helping you execute the product or the service that you need in order to deliver to the customers. So as you say, it's quite a balance in some sense, but what we are doing is when customers pressure us to be better, our tendency is to kind of pressure the partners to be a bit better as well. But again, we need to be nice because we need them to understand that we are on the same page, that we are this problem or this things that we want to improve or the customers want to improve would also improve basically the number of clients that we could bring to them. So it's a win-win game. That's something that they should see. But again, it's a balance across the two parties. And again, at the end of the day, what we want to see are really people or partners sharing that they are happy and satisfied, and they are actually doing things like staying with us, and also providing us with honest feedback, regardless of also of on how we should handle our business and so on. So again, it boils down to trust.
All right. There's a whole lot of personal approach over there. Very important to have the right attitude, being nice in this case, and actually leading towards somewhat of a mutually reinforcing relationship by improving your relationship with your suppliers and key partners. You're actually able to address the needs of your customers very well. How about with you with Mars's case, Faye? Please.
Okay, so so the ultimate customers for Mars are the people who buy our products, right? And where we see consumers in the future going is they will demand for better transparency and understand where their products come from, how the raw material is made, how the company who makes it, are they responsibly sourcing, how are they treating people in the supply chains, what are there human rights challenges that we are addressing. And I think it's only going to get more challenging, and I see that the potential of the next generation youth consumers will even demand more of that transparency. So I think as a company, how do we then ensure that we are able to do that is work with different supply chain partners, NGOs, donors, to create that transparency. But then, so we've mapped all of our suppliers, our farmers. We know which farmer, how each farm is performing. We look for traceability, so we can also tie in the intervention as needed. The reality is that it is a wide supply chain we do. So we work with hundreds of thousands of farmers. So that will not be achieved overnight. It has to be done over a period of a number of years. But then that data also has to be turned into insights. Insights in terms of how do we better manage our programs and actually start to see adoption practices at the farm level that will impact what we care about. So the 5 impact areas that Mark cares about is income, for increasing income, looking at addressing human rights challenges, and respecting it. And then also a number of other environmental, like land use, yield, greenhouse gas emissions, and things like that. So only data, I think, and harnessing data and nurturing it into insights that can help us do that. This is, how we, and again, no technology in the world is going to replace what, like Ruel said, it's the human connection, it's the trust, it's the communities, it's that really counts here. It's the last mile connection.
All right. That's actually quite impressive. The idea there, the idea that the support, the relationship with your customers and your key partners is actually also reinforced by creating a system, a network that essentially helps everyone. So I suppose we're talking about partnerships with government, with NGOs, and etc. So that and that reinforcement really encapsulates what's being sought out from sustainability, sustainable and inclusive businesses. Very impressive. So and then we move on to the next question, which is, of course, all these talk about customer demands, creating good impact with our farmers, with our key partners, and good relationships with our customers are for naught if we're not able to translate that into financial and operational activity. So my third and final question for you two is, how do you translate your competitive advantage objectives into financial and operational activities? Let's start with you, Faye.
Yeah, so I believe that the way businesses are evolving is changing. We are recognizing that profit alone is not the reasons why businesses exist. We also have to have a positive societal benefit. And if any parts of the supply chain is broken, then we don't have a sustaining business to lean on. So to work on sustainability is a business imperative and a strategy. It's something that is the way businesses should have run for many years, and now is coming to a realization that we have to, and so we have to catch up on decades of taking from the system until something broke. Well, you can hear a storm gathering. If you hear something in the background, it's because there's lightning and thunder. So I think it's just the way businesses will evolve and translate. So we do need to find metrics that not just reflect the financial measures, but rather what is a holistic metrics that looks at also some of the social capital, natural capital, and human capital that we are creating. And so Mars is also doing a number of work in the areas of metrics to look at if we could properly measure the trust that is built with this community. Clearly, you're going to get better loyalty and constant supply, right? That, of course, could be financially translated to some bottom line in terms of volumes and costs. But ultimately, it was only us investing for years in building this trust that enabled us to get that. So to have that patience sometimes to understand that while you are building capacity, there's a level of investment that goes in that you reap the benefits later in terms of a return on investment is something that businesses will have to come and understand and be willing to invest in. So it's called patient capital. There's lots of other social impact investors around that, that we could partner with that has more patient capital. The good news, luckily for Mars, is because we are a family-owned business, we think like a family, we think long-term. So we're not too dependent on externally funded activities to sustain that upfront investment that is needed to invest in farmer training and capacity building and research. We don't make a cent from any of this breeding work that we do. And when we do it, we make it available for the whole industry. So it's sort of like a lot of people don't understand why, but it really makes sense in the long term when we stem the decline of the crop in Indonesia. We've got supplies that's constant. There are multiple other competitive advantage and benefits that comes back to us, but it requires really, a view of a much, much longer term view.
All right. So essentially, we're again, just to summarize more or less the key points there. I heard very much the need for key indicators. You mentioned that very well in your presentation earlier as well. And the idea of being able to measure not just your profit, but also the other indicators for, let's say, your environmental impact, your social impact, and have the mindset for a long-term aspect. But I would like to see if Ruel is able to deal with that. Just to inform the audience, for example, Grow Asia was able to figure out that many of the agribusiness, inclusive agribusiness models took around 8 to 10 years to be able to become quite stable and successful. Now, obviously, Ruel, with Cropital not actually being 8 to 10 years just yet in operation, but it seems like you're able to achieve that anyway. How do you do that?
Okay, so hi again, everyone. I'd like to resonate also what Faye mentioned about the investment. So I think it's a big term for most of us, especially the ones starting new. But one thing that we should think about always is that investment doesn't have to be big amount of money. It could be really, really years and years of hard work plus some amount of money, or it could be also leveraging on your existing relationships and finding, is there a free office? Is there a free this, free that, free this, free support that you could get so that you could really achieve what you want to do? So given that, you really need to start somewhere, and it would really take quite a long time before you actually reach a point of sustainability. And we ourselves cannot, we've reached sustainability at some point, but again, when you reach a certain point, you really need to rethink. am I not investing enough? Should I invest more in order for my scalability, for my process to actually grow, and for me to retain that competitive advantage and to grow even further? So in my space, at least in Cropital, in the financial space, one thing that has been essential for us is learning what is our value on both the side of the farmers and on the side of the lenders. So we know that some of the farmers that we approach with, the current interest rate they have was like 10% per month. And it could be as high as 20%, even in the mountainous area. But the decision, if you're just thinking about business, is okay, I could just go 1% less, then I'm better. Then I could do that and earn a lot more. But that's not the way you need to think about it. So again, the social aspect of things is very, very important, especially in what we are doing. So I really feel that if you are in agriculture, you need to be really socially thinking about the small farmers and not only thinking about the profit, because it's not sustainable, as Mars mentioned also, because the farmers are really the ones that generate the production, the ones that need your customers that would sustain the business. So thinking about it, that okay, we have quite a room, 20% for some areas, then some areas it's as low as 5% per month. We feel that we should lower it to a point that they would have decent income. Then on the other side of the market, we have the lenders. So on the side of the lenders, the question we have, okay, given that the farmers are paying this much in terms of the interest rate, how much should we give them? Because a portion of it has to be provided to them in order for us to convince them. Again, it ends up with the value. What is the value we want to provide them? So the baseline right now for most of the lenders we have is bank deposit. Let's say that's the current method. And these are small amounts that we are raising, and we have capped for the investors as well. So what is $100 for a person who has a few hundreds or even $1,000 on a bank account and earning 0.25% interest rate in bank deposit? That's the rate in the Philippines for the big banks. The smaller banks sometimes give higher, but essentially from 0.25%, what could be the rate that would be modest enough or effective enough to convince them? And what other things that would make them even want to do it more? So based on our initial study, the helping part is really the top priority of the people that we've talked to. Then the returns is secondary. So what we thought of is, okay, we could give a decent return of around 7 to 10% per annum on the side of the lenders, and we could focus our attention on the margin that we could develop or we could generate in order to provide it back to the farmers. What services can we provide? Not only funding. Can we do marketing for them? Can we do cheaper supplies for them? Can we do other things for them? So that's the part that we are really looking into when it comes to competitive advantage and translating it into financial and operational objectives. One thing that we are quite clear on as well is that we understand that cost can be lowered. So even if we start at quite a high cost in providing the right value to our customers, we know that at some point in time, as long as we focus on the right metrics, we can lower the cost and we could become more profitable, or we could become more sustainable as an organization.
All right. Okay. I would like to capture some of the earlier points you mentioned. Essentially, there's this idea of entrepreneurship there, wherein you're looking for a whole lot of resources, especially if you're starting up. What's available to you, what you can actually access, just so that you can run your business. But at the same time, there is that idea that if resources are not exactly very abundant, you're gonna have to work harder. And now, combining both of your answers so far, I could also sense that it's not just about the core business. If you really want to build your relationships, and that's actually going to impact very much your financial and operational activities at the end, your objectives at the end, it's being able to extend yourselves, being able to address other issues that might not be directly related to your core businesses. That seems to be the one a common denominator between Cropital and Mars's uh, re good relationships with your farmers and your customers. All right. I heard that there were very good questions from the audience. Nadia, perhaps I could you could come in to ask those questions for us, for them rather.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Ibufe and Ruel, for sharing. And now we'd like to open it up to audience questions that we have collected throughout the session. But if you have any additional ones, please feel free to include them in the question box while we're conversing. So the first question that I'm going to ask is to Faye. It's from Zhang, and the question is, so you mentioned a few tips for introducing research to the market in terms of identifying the early adopters, low-hanging fruits. But it would be great to get more insight around how researchers could then pursue long-term partnerships with businesses to scale their work.
Okay. Well, it has to start somewhere, right? And I think the reality though is, if you are doing a new crop product, for example, is to reach out to those like companies that are doing research. So we could do, the research, either maybe you could do the research together. So we, at some levels, we do joint collaboration with some research institutions to ensure that we put in the farmers' needs, as well as our understanding of science, and maybe the university or the academia's understanding, and we combine that into looking for and so it's co-development process. So that's at one level. Another level, if you already believe you have a product, is that to work with us and with the communities to test it. So putting it out in the field and actually doing really good baselines and post lines will be able to, demonstrate the cost benefit ratios back. And the benefit of doing it within the community environment is very much, that you also engage the community and they can see the impact of it as well. However, you can only do that when you have a fairly safe and already proven product. You can't do that. We very much do a lot of testing in-house in our research stations first before we develop the solution, because we are willing to take the risk, but we can't let farmers take the risk. But once we know that we've got a method or a technology that works, then you've got to start to extend it out into the farming communities and doing it with them. So co-developing and all that with them is an important aspect. The third point of innovation is actually what we hear back from the farming community. And actually a lot of our own ideas came back from the ground up. So having that feedback loop and constant feedback loop is critical as a researcher, to ensure that, we may believe, here's our hypothesis, right? We believe that we can address this virus pathogen by this. But reality is, can farmers even adopt that practice? Once, is it something that is in their norm that they would do, or are there barriers to them adopting it? So it's better to probably listen to them upfront and before you design your solution, than to, come with a ready solution that you go, hey, here you go, this is brilliant, use it. Rarely does that, I've not seen that work. So I think, that iterative process is what I'd like to come back to again and again. So so work with companies who have access to a lot of these farm outreach and programs. And certainly we can be collaborating together on a joint research or a joint community-based research, right?
Great, thank you, Faye. So I guess the message that's coming through the session is really focusing on this iterative process to create a feedback loop to inform the way you approach your research, and then also in terms of identifying partners who then could help you further in that process. So I have a slightly, related question, and this one is directed to Ruel. So so did you experience any challenges with product registration and IP issues? And if so, how did you address them?
Okay, so in our case, since we are actually in a field that is quite new, crowdfunding, crowd lending, so this is one of the main hurdles we know we will experience. So right from the start, around in the same year, 2016, we've been in touch with the right regulators or with the right individuals in the government to make sure that they know that we exist. Because the worst thing that can happen is them issuing cease and desist order that you stop operating because they don't know you or they don't want you to operate. So as early as our first year, they were informed of what we were doing. And there were no rules back then. And even we've met, just to share, sorry, we've met with a representative from the central bank and also from the Securities and Exchange Commission and one from the Department of Finance. And the three of them don't know what to do. It's like, no, you should do this. You should regulate them. Or no, I think you should regulate them. It's more like a discussion that they don't even know where to start. But one thing again, as Ms. Faye shared, is that time is really very important part of any form of business, particularly when you're doing something innovative and also in agriculture. So it took a while, like it took 2 years before they were able to come up with a list of draft of rules and guidelines. And we were happy that along the way of them drafting it, we were always invited to be in the round table to discuss, to share our insights, how they would form it. And come 2019, they were able to officially release it. Because we understand they are just protecting the public who are putting money and lending to whoever people that could be online. So in our case, it's the farmers. So we are that relationship right from the start, even though there's no regulation yet and etc. We wanted to show up and we wanted to reach out, and I think the regulators appreciated it. And right now, actually, the regulators want us to be the first one with that license. So it kind of gives that premium also of that relationship in place. Yeah, so that part on the registration issues, I guess.
All right. Actually, it's quite interesting to hear from your responses that again with Faye, there's that co-development process, that iterative process that's really very important. But when Ruel came in, trying to address that question on intellectual property, we now realize that the co-development process also involves not just the actual key part, the direct suppliers and your customers, but as well the people from the supporting agencies from the government, for example, just to be able to inform them as well as to what kind of product and services it actually that you're providing. And that's very important if, let's say, you're actually well advanced in your innovation process. If let's say that's relatively unheard of from their case. Perhaps we have more questions from Nadia, or at least from the audience rather.
Thanks, Anton. So the next set of questions is going to be around responses to COVID-19. And I guess I'm going to ask or direct it to both speakers. But first, I think I might ask Faye to answer. But the question is, so the current pandemic is challenging us to make changes. Lockdowns, for example, are preventing us from making contact to markets and providers. How will you adjust and continue to deliver service through the current circumstances?
The current crisis offers us a lot of challenges, clearly. The good news is that we don't work with perishables. So I don't know, maybe in Ruel, if you are dealing with crops that are perishable, it becomes a lot more sensitive. In our case, we deal with cash crop that you can dry and keep and all that. So generally, of course, the first thing was it was safety of the community and safety of our the people in our supply chains, right? And so that had to be top of mind, and that had to be designed into every part of the process that we worked in. So the way we collected the beans, the touch points of when, anytime there's a human contact that comes in, we had to basically stop a lot of the farmer training because that involves larger groups of people. We went more into, is there ways we could do one-to-one coaching? We worked with our partners, Cultiva, to look at how can we broaden the reach of communicating to farmers through SMSs and understanding how we could still deliver, signals of, this is the time to start spraying or doing this or that pest disease management, but looking at technology of how technology could be helping us there as well. But then where human interaction is needed, you just had to follow the guidelines that's available. And so that obviously slows everything down. But I think ultimately top of mind was for us was, this is the farmer's livelihood at stake. We cannot, break the chain, and that has to continue, but it has to continue in a way that was safe for us, safe for the community, and that we would, still be able to keep business running in a sense, but, ensure that we do it in a way that protects. Not sure if that helps.
Thanks, Faye. So I'm going to turn to Ruel, and there's a slightly, I guess, more specific question around this COVID response to you. And the question is around what measures and strategies are you now implementing given the burden of COVID-19 for both the company and your customers? And do you provide deferred payment with your borrowers?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So quickly, the crops that we are working with right now, or at least the product of the farmers, is rice. So in terms of the product, rice is a very staple commodity. And the demand is basically, it remains the same or even higher, given that there are supply chain issues with importing rice in the Philippines. So technically, the farmers that we have right now in terms of the market, it's not very much affected, or the impact of COVID is not the market on the side of the rice farmers. But what we've seen lately is that since most of our farmers are quite old, they are 60 years old and above, and our rules is quite very strict regarding them going out of their homes or of going out to the field. This is what the threat right now that we are looking into, because since given this limited mobility for those farmers that are quite old, which is generally a lot of them, they are limited with the option to get laborers who are quite younger. And again, the laborers in the farm is not really that abundant as well, given the current situation. And the mechanization level in the Philippines is not really too far yet. So it's really quite a challenge that we have quite high of supply or quite high of demand for laborers, but quite low in demand, or quite low in supply. And given this scenario, the prices of labor just increases, and it adds to the cost of the farmer. So on our end also, in terms of operations, the things that we are doing now, because since before, we have been using digital tools ourselves in order to reach out to the farmers and so on. So we are able to continue operating. That's one thing that we are happy that is happening. But in terms of scheduling group meetings for the farmers and acquiring new farmer groups, that is the one challenge that we are also experiencing right now. And we've been looking into just getting the list of the farmers in that particular group or community and just calling it, or working with smaller groups or inviting them in smaller groups so that we could acquire more farmers. But at the same time, making sure that our field officers are safe and that our farmers are definitely also safe with the right measures that we provide in place for our team and our people. So just a side note as well, apparently one of the government agencies that we work with is the Philippine Crop Insurance Corporation, just the one I mentioned. So since we have been doing digital processing of the insurance, we are able to actually, when we are able to still process crop insurances for the farmers, even though the full team, I believe, of the crop insurance right now is work from home, and they allowed us to do that. And I'm not really sure, but I really sense that I think we are just one of the very few who can process crop insurance at this moment in time. even the digitization effort that we did before.
All right. So very clearly that definitely with this COVID-19 pandemic in our context right now, safety is definitely the number one aspect on the activities that are being conducted through your business models. But it's also quite clear that it does not necessarily mean that you have to actually overhaul your business models. By understanding what the COVID-19 pandemic is actually how it actually impacts your business environment, and by having a strong idea of what exactly is valuable or important with regards to your business model, the actual adjustments are quite minor, and it actually allows you to operate even through the COVID-19 pandemic. All right, that's very impressive. Back to you, Nadia.
So I'm conscious of time that we're quite short, but we still have quite a few questions in the pipeline. So I wanted to check with the panelists if they're okay with answering a few more, so staying for maybe like 5 to 10 more minutes before we proceed. Is that
no
okay?
problem.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so the next question that I have is directed at you, Faye. So what will be the critical role of NGOs in this model, in the model, the Coco Doctor model, I guess? So would you please give an example with Mars's experience?
Okay, so NGOs play several roles. One is to give us the check and balances from a social environment perspective, right? So in the co-design of programs, they are the voice of the community. They are the ones that actually gives us a really good perspective sometimes that we may not sometimes as companies have. The second one is they spend public money. So theirs is, they can obviously only spend it on things that are, will. So in the case of, say, the Coco Doctor program, Coco Doctors need customers to sell their inputs and their coaching services too. If the farmers do not have the basic level of understanding, clearly they're not going to be much customers. So we did partner at that time with NGOs to do more of the farmer field school training. What it essentially was doing was creating this pool of educated farmers with the basic good agricultural practices knowledge that then could be tapped into by the Coco Doctors as existing customers. So in areas where we find where the literacy rate is incredibly low, or the understanding of crop is very low, you need that big move on farmer training. And that's usually what the roles of like NGOs together with government extension can do. They can reach massive numbers of farmers that we can then bring in the service delivery or the higher end agronomy and services that will then meet the needs of these the farmers. But again, in any public-private partnership like this, every player has, every party has their role, being clear upfront what we're doing and what vision we're going to go for, and ensuring that every party understands their role and how the program is like a jigsaw that comes together and complements each other is something that, it's good to establish upfront, so that then, and you can work collectively over this, the years to execute against the program.
Thanks, Faye. And I think I might reformat that question and throw it now to Ruel. I guess as a startup, in your experience, Ruel, have you worked with NGOs as well? And what is their role, if you have?
Sure. So quite similar to what Faye mentioned, NGOs, some of them have budget to actually do and execute things that are quite complementary to what we are doing. So actually, the first insurance customer that we had, the one that paid for the deployment, is an NGO that paid for the deployment for the cooperative that would benefit from that particular product. So those collaboration and those partnerships we are able to see. And aside from the funds that they could actually bring into the picture, it's also the existing programs they have with the farmers. Because on our end, as an agri company, we want to reach out to as many farmers as we can. And NGOs who have existing projects that we could tap into and work with their farmers is one of the best gifts that we can have, because it reduces the cost of finding the customers. The relationship is already existing, which really makes more sense in order to tap in those networks.
All right. So in a way, there's that, again, trying to understand, in this case, not just your, again, key partners and customers, but also understanding your complementers. And NGOs in this case provide a lot of complementation with regards to the business models, in this case of Mars and Cropital. And in that, and by knowing what they are looking for as objectives in their programs, you are actually also be able to actually utilize their resources to work and benefit both programs, not just theirs, but also yours. All right. So back to Nadia.
Great, thanks, Anton. And I think I might make this, I guess, one of the last questions. And this one is for Faye once again, specifically for the Cocoa Doctors program. So does the Cocoa Doctors program depend on ongoing subsidies for inputs?
Theirs is a business. And so in the case of, say, the good clonal, the superior clones that we, after the training with Mars, they go away and propagate. They do it for profit. And so there's a margin in there, and typically they would be doing it for farmers who are willing to buy. And this is what I meant in the initial part of the bell curve, in the adoption curve. You're looking for the willing and adopting farmers. And how you would know that is people are willing to pay for that. So for the planting material, there are no subsidies. But having said that, the government looked at our model and they were incredibly interested to replicate this. If the government wanted to provide the subsidy for the seedlings in the future, they actually would be contracting with the Cocoa Doctors in this case to buy it from the Cocoa Doctors, because they know it's the quality seedlings, and then and distribute it to the poorest of the poor, for example, that may not afford some of these planting material. In the case of fertilizer, I would say that we try to develop a cocoa-specific fertilizer, but the nature of fertilizer in Indonesia is there's the subsidized fertilizer, which is very cheap, and farmers would always use, although it's not the right one for any over time, sort of degrades the value and assets of their land. They see that as their only option. So we then, through the partner platform, the cocoa partnership platform we have in Indonesia, worked with the government to develop a cocoa-specific fertilizer that was subsidized. So then what happened was we lowered the barrier of entry and investment that farmers needed to put the right inputs into their farm. But that required, again, 2 or 3 years of development and discussions with the research institute, ICRI, with, to define the right cocoa formulation, to work with the Ministry of Agriculture. So they wanted to then, and work with the fertilizer companies to develop this cocoa fertilizer that now in the market is available at the subsidized rate. And now farmers have the choice. And obviously when you have a cocoa fertilizer and that's subsidized, they now have that choice. So I would say subsidies, although not being the long-term answer, could help to lower that barrier or the investment requirement, and does get farmer on the path to prosperity a lot faster. So I'm not a fan or to say no, it's not needed, but it really depends on what it is that we are hoping to achieve.
Thanks so much, Ibu Faye. I think that was really useful and very practical, I guess, input for a lot of our audience members today. And we still have a lot of questions coming up in the pipeline, but I'm also mindful of time. So I think we might just wrap up the Q&A session there. I would like to thank our speakers once again for sharing. And I think I can say on behalf of the audience that it has been quite an insightful session and learning experience for all of us. And I guess if we could move to the next slide, please, Pranav. So before we end, I would just like to point out a few things. One, we would really appreciate your feedback in terms of how we could improve on our work, as well as suggestions on future topics that you would like us to cover through the GALA program. I'll be sending a feedback form shortly after the session and look forward to getting your input. But secondly, I would like to invite you to connect with the work of our in-country teams in Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, and Vietnam, or our regional work streams around digital agriculture, responsible agriculture investments, or gender. Ibu Faye, for example, is also very closely involved with our work in Indonesia. And then next slide, please, Pranav. So here are the relevant email addresses to stay in touch with Grow Asia, depending on your interest. Once again, my name is Nadia, and then my colleague Pranav is also online here with us today, helping us with the back-end production of this session. And he manages our work in Indonesia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. So if you have any questions around then, you can reach out to him. And then I've also included my colleague Reggie's email, who manages the countries that's listed over there. So at this point, I would just like to say, on behalf of Grow Asia, thank you once again to the speakers for your contributions. I think it's been a great session and we've had a lot of fun. And then to all of you for joining us in the session today. And with that, I'd like to say good afternoon, and I'll see you again next time.